Right, our top focus story is the news that is coming from China, which has in fact grabbed the headlines since the past few days. But today it has in fact reached a new proportion once again as China recorded over 40,000 COVID cases. Massive COVID spike that China has been witnessing for the past several days now. But that's also led to a major crackdown, major clampdown by the Xi Jinping government. For the first time, though, the kind of scenes that we are seeing from China of unprecedented defiance as people have taken to the streets now protesting against the stringent measures which the Xi Jinping government is bringing in order to curb the number of rising COVID cases. In fact, hundreds of people took to the streets in Beijing, Shanghai, several other cities, if I can just name a few, Xinjiang, Urumqi, Nanjing, Guangzhou and Wuhan in order to protest against Xi Jinping's zero COVID policy. In a rare show of defiance, as I said, hundreds of people who have come out raising slogans against Xi to step down. Those are the kind of slogans that they have been raising. They have raised placards and some protesters, as I said, have also called for the President Xi to step down. So massive COVID spike and major protests that China is witnessing at this point in time. In fact, let me also welcome on the show Mr. Einar Tangen, Senior Fellow of the Taihe Institute and Chairman Asia Narratives, who is joining us for more for discussion on the show. Sir, thank you so much for joining us here on Mirror Now. First of all, from your perspective, since you're of course an insider, if you could just tell us, is this, first of all, these kind of scenes that we are seeing from China, would it be right to categorize this as unprecedented sort of protests that we are seeing taking place in mainland China? I'm not sure in recent history whether we have seen this kind of protests before.
No, we really haven't, and especially, I mean, there are always issues and in individual areas, generally disputes over money, and those can sometimes grow, but they're very, very localized. This is a lot bigger. There's clearly a tremendous amount of frustration amongst people, but actually they're being a little counterproductive. I mean, getting together, during a spike in COVID cases and singing songs and shouting in close proximity to others is probably going to be another way of spreading it, which will lead to more actions by the government. So I think it's a little bit counterproductive. The Chinese government isn't going to change everything because you're holding up a blank sheet of white paper.
Right. Talking about the fact that this is, of course, the kind of calls and slogans that are being raised against President Xi Jinping. People are actually calling for him to step down, saying we don't need emperors, we don't need rulers of this sort. Do you feel, after having seen the kind of protests we have seen in China over the past two, three days, is this going to have any sort of an impact on Xi? He's recently been elevated to become the supreme leader of sorts in a way nobody has, in fact, in recent times in China. So is this in any way going to affect his current status or the legacy?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the Chinese government, the central government, and Xi himself enjoyed tremendous popularity, especially at the very beginning of the COVID pandemic. But, almost 3 years later, people are very frustrated. A lot of small, medium-sized enterprises are feeling the pinch. Obviously, many went out of business. So there's this desired return to normal. And when people in China were looking at the World Cup and they saw all these people maskless, shouting, having a good time, they thought, well, why aren't we doing that? The fact that perhaps other countries are doing something that you're not doing in China struck a chord in people. It caused them to question the government. I think after a while, though, this will subside.
Right. So, and also we've seen, of course, the foreign media is reporting a lot on this entire matter. BBC has, of course, claimed today that one of their journalists was assaulted. In terms of the way that the Chinese media is being able to report it, of course, there's already a lot of restrictions on it. But do you also see any sort of curbs on the media in terms of reporting what is happening on the ground right now? In fact, there had been a lot of discussions in the past as well that how the kind of reports that would have come out of Wuhan, for example, might have been in some way suppressed to some extent. But are those reports also something that the Chinese government, are these rather allegations that the Chinese government is facing this time around as well? Because this time, of course, the foreign media has already picked it up in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of going back to your question about Wuhan, it wasn't the press that was doing it. It was the local government, and they were severely punished. Many of them have been relieved of their duties and their careers have been finished. Some even went to jail. In terms of right now, you see very little reporting by the national news organizations about these incidents, but you are seeing some stories coming about changes that the government is doing. There was a practice where they were allowing local communities to, in essence, create their own rules. They could decide whether or not you were in quarantine or not. It wasn't the central government. It wasn't the city government. The city government would provide, basically say, look, this is a time of danger. You should be on heightened alert. And then they would leave it to these community groups to do it. Unfortunately, a lot of these community groups are run by sometimes elderly people who are volunteering, and they really don't understand the science. They're scared about making mistakes, so they just, institute a lockdown. Or in some cases, in Beijing, I have seen areas where they were literally, welding shut doors or chaining them shut, and that's a fire hazard. Now, that's not what happened in Urumqi. That was basically a social media myth. Somebody just took a picture of a wired door and said this is what was happening at that fire. That was not the truth, just false information. But the Beijing government has come out with a statement from Xinhua saying that there will be no community group is allowed to wire shut any kind of doors or anything like that. They can't block exits. So you can see them changing slowly in responding to this. But the Chinese government is it's a very bureaucratic. They are concerned about this. They are concerned about the economy. They certainly don't want to sabotage their own economy. The question is, how do you open up safely when so many of your population have not gotten the boosters that they need in order to have a safe opening?
Right, Mr. Tangen, what we can also see is, in a way, a lot of resentment, anger on the streets. Given the way, right from 2020 to now, every government, of course, has its own way of handling the COVID pandemic, which was honestly unprecedented for everyone. But given from 2020, 21, now 2022, what we are facing, China seeing this kind of a surge, is this the way that Xi government is clamping down on COVID? Are these curbs, in a way, much newer than what China saw earlier? Or is the resentment primarily around the incident of fire, which took place recently in China and 10 people were killed in that? And several Chinese locals, of course, believe that the way it was handled was, rescue operations got hampered because of the stringent COVID restrictions. So is that the reason for the outpouring of anger that we can see on the streets right now? Or are these escalated COVID curbs that China has not, or Chinese residents have not, nationals have not witnessed before? What is the cause for this kind of, anger on the streets of China that we are seeing this time around? What would you say?
Well, a tremendous frustration. As I said, almost 3 years. And people in China look on the television, they see people enjoying themselves at the World Cup, and they say, why aren't we doing that? Of course, they don't see the people who get sick or die, or the ones who contract long COVID and basically are unable to work. So, they're reacting to a tremendous amount of uncertainty that's out there. And I think the government is going to have to provide, more indications of how this is going to be done. One thing very clearly, they need to get more people vaccinated, more people boosted. They have, and it's a situation where the spark was this alleged interference with it, but that was not, in fact, the case. That was just erroneous.
Right. I am really sorry to interrupt you there, but we'll have to leave the discussion here as more breaking updates are coming in. Thank you so much, Mr. Einar Tangen, for joining us on the show.